Well, we started last week in the book of Nehemiah. And I mentioned last week there was a famous song. Oh, that was Jeremiah. Okay, yeah, all right, yeah, all right. Yeah, we left off here last week. Throughout Scripture, you'll see references to the temple. And a lot of times people will refer to, the third or the fourth or, the second. And, it always seems like they're referring to something different, okay? So since we were kind of on that topic, I thought I would hit that real quick. Remember, when the tabernacle is mentioned, that's not the temple, okay? A tabernacle is a tent, but a tent is not a tabernacle. Okay, the tabernacle is used exclusively when we're dealing in reference to God's dwelling place. Then, of course, Solomon's temple is always the first temple. Again, it's a solid structure with the same basic design as the tabernacle, but at that point in time, I think they made it at least twice as large. And we know that when the Babylonians came in, they pretty much destroyed everything. Then we have Zerubbabel's temple, and this was during the Persian period, roughly, golly, I'm going to say 30 years now. I'm sure now. I have to figure it out. But anyway, roughly maybe 30 years before Ezra came, okay? And this is during the Persian period. And back then people they had some money for the temple. They had some money given to them for some private homes, but nobody wanted to live in the city. It was not protected. There was no security. Why pour money into a temple? When everything else is in ruins. So they erected a temple, but it was just a shadow of its former glory. It was not nearly as nice. And so then during the Hellenistic period, and what do we say that word Hellenistic means? Yes, anytime you say that word Hellenistic, that means Greek, okay? So during the Hellenistic period, they did some remodeling, and that was certainly a big help. But then really, the temple had to be rebuilt during the Roman period by Herod, for a lot of different reasons. First of all, the first temple was literally falling down. It was just dangerous, okay? They probably had a, condemned sign on the front door, right? And another thing is during the intertestamental period, Antiochus Epiphanes captured the temple. He slaughtered pigs in the temple. We've talked about this before. Cooked the pigs and then splashed the blood and the pig broth all over everything and desecrated it. So the temple really needed to go down, had to be destroyed, and a new temple had to be built. And so Herod did it, and the thing is, Herod is notoriously a bad guy, but of course he did it to ingratiate himself with the people, but they gave him full permission to do it. They gave him the thumbs up. So he did it, and here's where it gets a little bit complicated. Sometimes Herod's temple is referred to as the third temple, but a lot of scholars consider Zerubbabel's temple and the remodeled temple and Herod's temple to be one and the same. Just depends on what book you're reading, okay? So it gets really complicated. And so when somebody refers to the second, third, fourth temple, whatever, you got to really see, look at the context and see what they're talking about. Then, of course, there's the tribulation temple. And, many of you maybe got my email today. There was a big fire on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And, I've been saying that whether it starts World War III or it's during World War III, something's going to happen up there. And I just always assumed it would be one of these rogue missiles crashing up there, smashing everything down. The Israelis are going to take the Temple Mount back over, and they have to take it over in order to rebuild it. They would never share the Temple Mount with the Muslims, and the Muslims would never share it with them. And so really there's no choice, okay? So if prophecy is to be fulfilled, the temple must be rebuilt, okay? So that's the tribulation temple. It'll only be there for a short time. Of course, the Antichrist will desecrate it, just like Antiochus Epiphanes did, okay? It'll be the same type of a deal. And then, of course, there's a reference to Ezekiel's temple, which is in Ezekiel's vision of the millennium. Okay, so during that 1,000 years when Christ rules and reigns, right, for the 1,000-year period, I guess he's got to stay somewhere, right? So there'll be a temple, supposedly. And, of course, there's references to the heavenly temple, okay? So a lot of little different temples there, isn't there? You know? Yeah. So that might help clear up a little bit of the confusion. I pulled this up off the internet, but you can see whoever put this slide together, they considered temple number 1 to be Solomon's temple, and then here temple 2, Zerubbabel's temple and Herod's temple, they consider that to be the same, temple 2, okay? And so it just depends on what source you're going to for that. So. Okay, so let's get to Nehemiah's prayer. So now we're actually starting in the text, Nehemiah 1:1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hilkiah, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept for some days. I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So let's talk about that for just a moment. Nehemiah's name means the Lord comforts, which is true, doesn't it? He gives us comfort. And he begins his memoir by introducing himself, the son of Hilkiah. Did I spell it right? Hilkiah? Okay. Anyway. And while little is known about his family, it's highly probable that he was a descendant of the tribe of Judah and of the royal family of David. Scholars have different reasons to speculate that point, so certainly a possibility. He began writing this in the month of Kislev, and you can see there's different spellings. Just like some of these names have different spellings, it depends on your translation. In the 20th year of Artaxerxes, so that would be anywhere between the end of November and the beginning of December, right in that area. That's the way their month runs. 445 BC. Now he was in the citadel, which is also like a palace. It's also very much like a praetorium. Remember what a praetorium is? It's kind of like a half palace, half military base. Sometimes it also serves as a prison, okay? This was in Susa, or some translations pronounce it Shushan, which was the ancient royal capital of Persia, east of the Tigris. It was also the favorite winter residence for Persian kings. Nehemiah's brother, golly, it could have been a literal brother. You know, it could have been a cousin. Could have been anyone in his family. It could have been just a fellow Jew or someone from his tribe, okay? Because they called everybody brother there, you know, back then. So it's kind of hard to say. And again, his name is Hanani. He came over with other men from Judah. He was probably Hananiah. Hanani is kind of short, the short version. His name means the Lord is gracious, and he is gracious, isn't he? And according to an Elephantine papyrus, there was at that time period a Hananiah who headed up Jewish affairs in Jerusalem for the Persian Empire. So probably the same guy. However, according to the Jewish historian Josephus, Nehemiah had been walking around the palace walls when he overheard some people speaking in Hebrew. He ascertained that they had recently returned from Judea, and so he inquired about the condition of Jerusalem, and they informed him of the bad news. So Josephus likes to give us a little bit of a different version, but basically it's the same. One thing about Josephus, if you ever read the writings of Josephus, he's never really been proven wrong on anything he says about the history. He's a very good historian. Sometimes he slightly embellishes things, but it's all still true. It's all still relatively very accurate. The holy city was still in ruins after 100 years, because, just from the time of Daniel, when the city was overthrown, to now the time of Nehemiah, I think I figured it's about 100 years now. And everything was in ruins other than the temple having been rebuilt by Zerubbabel, but again, not even close to its former glory. The city remained desolate and defenseless. The commissions previously given to Zerubbabel and Ezra were only to permit and fund repair upon the temple and some private dwellings. But without walls and gates, the exiles were defenseless against their enemies. And if you're going to have a home, if you're going to have a business, if you're going to make money, if you're going to survive with your family, you got to have some level of protection. When Nehemiah heard this, he sat down, he wept and mourned. The family member had died. I mean, that's how passionate this guy is. He probably had never set foot in Jerusalem, right? But he considered that his homeland, and so he's very passionate. But he did do something about it. First of all, he fasted and prayed for some time. And, we have a bad habit as Christians. We say, well, all we can do is pray. But you know what? That's one of the most important things you can do. It is one of the most, as far as Christians go, it's the most important thing we can do is pray. Sometimes we almost make it sound like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do more. Well, at least I can pray, But, that's a great thing. I love knowing when people pray for me. Yeah, and I'm sure you all feel the same way. It's nice to know someone's praying for you, That means a lot. So this went on for some time. Just imagine if you received news that your family was living in poverty and harassed from thugs with no way of protecting themselves. Your heart would go out to them, Most interpreters, however, don't believe that Nehemiah was distressed about the Babylonian siege that happened so long ago. They believe that the Jews had attempted to rebuild the walls earlier during the reign of Artaxerxes I, but because of political protest by Rahum and Shimshai, the king ordered the Jews to desist. So they tried to fix the walls, they tried to fix the gate, and then those yucky people went over there and knocked it down again. The Jews also observed solemn fasting and prayer every year in commemoration of Jerusalem's fall. Nevertheless, Jeremiah was a man of deep passion and patriotism for his promised land and his people. Nehemiah did hear in secret what God in heaven could see and respond to. So, when he prayed, he was in his room, wherever he was living, and he prayed, and, he did that in private. And, we have to remember that when you do something in public, everybody sees it. That could be for show. But privately, this guy was mourning, and he was fasting, and he was praying to God, and God knew it. And that, I always say that if you want to impress anyone, try to impress God. We're not here to impress people. We're here to please Him. So it may not seem like much, but I'll tell you what, his prayers had an effect. Okay, verse 5. Then I said, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commandments. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you today. Before you day and night. Before you day and night. For your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commandments, the decrees, and the laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commandments, then even if your exiled people are at the furthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was the cupbearer to the king. Okay, so this is his memoir. And, I like the fact that he wrote down his prayer. Sometimes people read prayers and then you think, oh, it's kind of cheesy because they're not saying it from the heart. But you know what? You can really laboriously pour over your prayer and put it into writing. And that's what he did. And I think it's really important that he did that. Because if I go to a big event and they ask me to pray, and I got to now just kind of pray out of my head, I can do it, no problem. But you know what? Later on, I always think, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that, or I forgot, So, again, I think it's great that he did that. So God is faithful to those who love and obey him, yet we all sin. Therefore, Nehemiah prayed day and night to confess the sins of his people and to ask for forgiveness. The text implies that Nehemiah prayed frequently and regularly. Notice that he didn't exclude himself and his family. That is the sign of humility. To admit that you're a sinner, to admit that you are a screwball like everybody else. What is our definition for sin? Yeah, anything we think, anything we say, or anything we do that violates God's standards. So we're all sinners, aren't we? And I love it that the fact that he's including himself among his people, that we're wicked, we've sinned against you, Lord. It's only when we sensed the awesome holiness of God Most High can the sinful depths of our human soul be revealed. I really believe that. When a person comes to a point in their life by God's grace that we recognize God for being holy, 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 that's when we can see ourselves realistically as being sinful, sinful, sinful. Yeah. Because once we see how high he is, then we can recognize how low we are. God's commands, decrees, and laws establish the moral standard by which to live, yet the people knowingly disobeyed. And when you knowingly disobey, that's wickedness. Thus, God's dispersion of the people was the ultimate consequence of their unfaithfulness. Even by Jesus' time, most of the Jewish people still lived in Jewish communities outside of Israel. That's why when they had these great festivals and they had to do the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, people were coming from all different countries. A lot of them didn't even speak the same, like they might have spoke Greek, but they didn't speak all the other languages that everybody else spoke. I want you to notice in that prayer that Nehemiah uses the pray acrostic. He begins in verses 5 through 6a with praising God. Then in verses 6b through 7, Nehemiah repented. In verse 11, Nehemiah asked. And then in verses 8 through 10, Nehemiah yielded. So a little bit out of our order, but it's the structure. In fact, most prayers in the Bible, unless they're just like really little sentence prayers, most prayers in the Bible are structured in that order. So it's good for them, it's good for us. Amen. So Nehemiah served as the king's cupbearer, which literally means one who gives someone something to drink. But don't think of him as just a common waiter. It was the duty of the cupbearer to choose and taste the king's wine and to make certain that it was not poisoned. So, yes. And food, yeah. There wasn't a separate royal taster? No. Because I would have applied for that job. Yeah. But that means you better trust the chef and you better trust the vineyard, the vintner, because, if they want to poison the king, you're going to get it first, right? So, you better be nice to people. You better be nice to people. Like I always say, be good to the chef because he might spit in your soup. And so it's nice to be really polite and nice to people when they're serving you. That doesn't mean that you're better than them or they're lower than you. Everybody has a job and everybody serves in one capacity or another. So I agree. Yeah, I think we should treat everybody with courtesy unless they prove that we can't treat them with courtesy. Yeah. Amen. That's very good. That's very good. So he was the royal taster and drinker, and thus the cupbearer, often they were eunuchs, was an officer of the court with frequent access to the king. Nehemiah was the chief cupbearer. So obviously, there were more people, and he would have had the king. Xerxes, the father of Artaxerxes the first, was killed by his own bedchamber, killed in his own bedchamber by his courtier. Is that how you say it, courtier or courtier? Too bad Rose is in here for that. But anyway, so if your father is murdered by by the attendant, you're going to be leery. But it seems like Artaxerxes and Nehemiah had a good relationship. The Hebrew word for cupbearer occurs 11 other times in the Old Testament. And I won't read all those addresses off to you unless you want to write them down or something. But so that was a very, very important job to be the cupbearer. And the king is a human being. He's got to eat and he's got to drink, right? And yeah. So now we're going to switch over to chapter 2. And we'll do a couple questions just to get us thinking. My first question is, what is a sentence prayer, and should they be silent or spoken aloud? Bingo. Very good, Art. Very good. Yeah. We all do it. Maybe don't even realize we're doing it. It just goes right back to when Paul said, to pray without ceasing. And, we do that. We'll say, oh, Lord, help me pick this thing up, or, God, I hope my knee doesn't go out this time. Or, we say stuff to God, We say to people when they sneeze, we say, bless you. God bless you. And as long as we're not just vainly saying things like that, it is a sentence prayer. We're asking God to bless them. Is that something that we should do out loud or quietly? Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because God knows, right? God knows what you're thinking and what you're saying, and so, yeah. Now, why would the king be so accommodating to the needs of the Jews or to Jeremiah's requests? What did I say, Jeremiah? Nehemiah. Why would the king be such a nice guy? Yeah. Yeah, it's just like we trust God. We think of Jesus as, our brother in one sense. But then there's also that healthy partition that we realize that even though, in a sense, Jesus is our friend and he's our best friend, he's our brother, but God is also our Father, and he is the king, and that makes us his subjects. He is the master, and therefore it makes us the servant. So we want to have that good relationship, but we also need to keep a healthy distance sometimes. Does that make sense? Respect. Yeah, respect. Yeah, I like that. Are letters of recommendation still important today, and if so, how? Yeah. You should. So they're important. They're still used today. There was one church, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was in Florida, and it was on the East Coast. And it was a First Baptist church, big church, looking for a pastor. They got a resume in from this guy, and the resume looked great. The education, experience, beautiful, yada yada yada. And it also came with a letter of recommendation from Dr. Johnny Hunt, the former president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And is Woodstock for First Baptist of Woodstock, Georgia, maybe. Anyway, he's a big wig. He's a big dog, right? And so Johnny Hunt had written him this beautiful, letter of recommendation, right? So the church made a big boo-boo. They thought, well, if Johnny Hunt, recommends this guy, then we don't even need to check him out. So he ended up ultimately, he preached for them, I guess, and I guess he was okay, and they hired him. And but as the weeks went on, they noticed there was something wrong. Just something wasn't right. And so after so many weeks or months, they finally went back to the resume, and they noticed it looked funny. The second time they looked at it a little bit more closely, and they thought it looked funny. And, he would list schools, but then he really wouldn't list the dates. Or he would list, degrees, but it never really said that he earned the degree. He kind of listed stuff, And so they started calling these schools up, and they said, well, we never heard of this guy. We never heard of this guy. What it turned out is this guy went to Dr. Johnny Hunt's church. And, I guess he wanted to go into the ministry or whatever, and so Dr. Johnny Hunt wrote him this beautiful letter of recommendation, but everything on the resume was a lie. So the recommendation was legit, but the resume was a lie. And, of course, this being a big First Baptist church on the coast made them really look foolish, So that's why, you need to check people out, Oh, yeah. Yeah, they got rid of him real fast. Oh, we don't know who this guy is. Anyway, yeah. Why do you suppose Nehemiah would have needed an armed escort on his way back to Judea? Yeah, robbers, thugs, bandits. Yeah. Exactly. Boy, you guys are doing good today. Very good. Yeah, he had money with him. He had important letters with him. He was the new official governor or he will become the new official governor of Jerusalem, or Judea, actually, And that's a big deal. And what a great person to assassinate, kill him and take his money. And so, yeah. The night. Now, we haven't gotten that far yet, but he's gonna go around the city and do his inspections at night. Why would he do that? Yeah. I think that's a good answer. Yeah. How many of you have ever heard of General von Steuben? Von Steuben. Yeah. In English, you might pronounce it Steuben, but in German, it's Steuben. General von. During the Revolutionary War, this German general came over to help out the colonists, the colonials. And so, they had just a bunch of farmers. They had no standing army. And so this guy, being a general, stayed up all night long and wrote the field manuals by hand. And then by day, he trained them. And if it wouldn't have been for him and the Marquis de Lafayette, we would still be under British control, right? So, yeah. You've heard of Steubenville, Ohio, maybe? That's named after him. But it's actually von Steuben. Okay? Is the expression, build it and they will come, true? Why or why not? Yeah. Yeah. Well, if there's a big imposing wall, something's got to be good back there, yeah? Ah. I like that answer. I like that. Yeah. Very good. Do some people today oppose the welfare of Israel for the same reasons they did in Nehemiah's day? So they hate the Jews. But why? Yeah. Yeah, I think it is a lot of jealousy has to do with it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think they are ambitious, but the reason why they're ambitious is because after being, slaves for 400 years, they're taught already from children that we're never going to be slaves again. And then when they would go for jobs, nobody wanted to hire them because they were Jews. And so they had to start their own businesses, and they had to do their own thing. And they became the bankers and the jewelers and the bank owners and, well, I just said bank owner. Yeah, the presidents of networks, yeah. So they really do control everything. I mean, for good or for bad. Yeah, people get jealous and this and that. Yeah. Yeah. And they're the chosen people, but I know from personal experience they can be really dirty and nasty too, and mean, And so, and I've met some that were so wonderful people. So they're people, just like all of us, right? Okay, Artaxerxes sends Nehemiah to Jerusalem. So Nehemiah chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it." So the 20th year of King Artaxerxes in the month of Nisan would have been that period of late March, early April, 444 BC. Almost 4 months after Nehemiah had received the bad news about the deplorable state of Jerusalem. So just to put it into perspective, this guy has been praying and fasting and mourning for 4 months. Nehemiah was serving wine to the king, and the king noticed his sadness. The Medo-Persian monarchy was very particular about how wine was to be served. In a polished and graceful manner, they would present the wine to their royal master. The cup would be washed in the king's presence. Some of the wine was then poured with the right hand to the left, which they drank also in the king's presence. Then the cupbearer handed the cup to him, not grasped, but gently with the tips of the finger and thumb. So there was etiquette involved, okay? That's probably why there's so much wine etiquette today, that everything has to be done in a certain way. And the Japanese and their tea ceremonies, everything has to be done in a certain way. It was normally very important that regardless of one's personal problems, that they maintain a cheerful disposition while in the presence of the king. If you were depressed and then made the king feel depressed, it could warrant punishment or even execution. So you're going to normally have a smile on your face and be giggly and jumpy and feeling great, right, in front of the king. Remember that Nehemiah had been fasting, and that along with his inward grief obviously took a physical toll on his body. He probably started looking bad. The king asked Nehemiah what was wrong. Nehemiah was naturally afraid, and especially when he tells King Artaxerxes the truth. The subject of Israel would have been contentious at best, and Nehemiah's request would have been great indeed. What a huge request to ask of the king. Paul. They were Zoroasters. You've heard of Zoroastrianism? Yeah. Zoroaster is the name of the prophet, and the king, the deity that they worshipped, and there may have been several, but it was probably Ahura Mazda. If you're familiar with Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, she's named after Ahura Mazda, the god, okay? It's not Swahili for peace, as she says. Zoroaster was the prophet of this religion, and I've taught it before. Because if you understand Zoroastrianism, it's the foundation of every other false religion in the whole world. If you can understand that one world theology, you can understand all the false religions, and therefore understand Christianity even a little bit better. That's why I've taught it before, and I might do that again. If you guys want me to do that again, I'll do it again. But, yeah. Well, what I think that was a silent sentence prayer. Because when the king asked him what was wrong, if he would have hesitated, the king would have been suspicious, like there's something going on. So he had to answer the king quickly. So I think he said, Lord, give me grace, or help me out, Lord. And then he turned to the king, and he answered the king, And, Yeah, Zoroastrianism is really fascinating, and many of our TV shows, I can see the Zoroastrianism in most of our TV shows that we watch. It has infiltrated every level of society, whether you want to call it New Age, Old Age, whatever, it's Zoroastrianism. And the thing is, a lot of even what we do today came from that culture. You know, for example, they did not believe in burying their dead in the ground because they thought that it would desecrate the ground. So what they would do is they would hang their dead people up on sticks and in trees and then let them rot, and then eventually they would, crumble and fall down, I guess, And that was probably the predecessor of crucifixion. Started way back then with the Zoroasters, hanging people on sticks. And then when Zoroaster died, they did bury him for some reason, because I guess they thought he was a holy man, whatever. They buried him, and to their surprise, the next day, this is legend, of course, right? The next day, his grave was covered with flowers. And that's why today we bring flowers to graves. It all comes from Zoroastrianism. So yeah, that was their religion. Got a little bit of time. The subject of it, again, it's a sore subject. Nehemiah certainly is asking something really huge of the king. Nehemiah began with the standard form of address by saying, "May the king live forever." Notice that he didn't mention Jerusalem by name, but rather he elicited the king's sympathy by emphasizing the desecration of his ancestral tombs. Jerusalem is also referred to as the city of the dead. And it's supposed to be an honor to be buried in Jerusalem. And so, because of the law, you're not really supposed to be buried within the city gates. So they began burying people outside of the city gates. And as the years went by, they had to expand the city gates. So some of the graves are in the city gates, or the city walls. But what's really interesting is that it is literally the only city in the world surrounded by graves. And usually there's like a big wall partition that separates you from the graves. And but if you look down into Jerusalem, you can see this ring, almost a ring around the city, and that is all graves. And yeah, there's little monuments, but see, over the years, people came and desecrated the monuments. So it's graves and rubble, and then I don't know who does it or who did it, but there's lots of garbage in there. And you would think in the holy city that they would clean up all the trash and all the garbage, but they really don't. And so we asked the tour guide, we said, the only thing that bothers us is all the garbage everywhere, what? And he actually got really kind of ticked off. I don't know if he gets asked that a lot or what the problem or the issue was, but they didn't like that question, But anyway. The king asked Nehemiah what he wanted. Nehemiah then made a brief prayer under his breath, which is characteristic of Nehemiah. You're going to see him praying constantly through every phase of this book. He turned to the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight," and this was also the acceptable way of asking the king for something. So he knew all the court etiquette. He knew what to do, what not to do. Why don't we stop there?